welcome to all readers, because tonight we're talking about something very close to your heart. Not a genre, not a title, but the thing itself, the old-fashioned book. How we read it, how long we'll keep on reading it, and will it be our choice? Already, as Amazon told us last year, ebooks are outselling the paper version, but that's just the beginning of the story. At least they're books. What about the truly horrible thought that the long-form book itself, with a beginning and an end and some hours of concentration required in the middle, is in serious trouble? That our quick twitch, highly wired text Twitter, bing, you have mail culture is changing our tastes and perhaps our brains so that books will simply cease to be read, or only, as Philip Roth has put it, by a cult minority, about as many who now read Latin poetry, and that's unlikely to keep the book world turning. Now, it's a very new area. Things are changing quickly and constantly, so I've asked our three guests tonight not for rock-hard predictions, but for their informed take on the future of books and reading. Let's meet them now, starting with Richard Watson, who writes, advises and strategises on matters future. His first book was Future Files. His latest, Future Minds, looks at how the digital age is changing our minds and why it matters. Kate Eltham runs the Queensland Writers' Centre and writes Electric Alphabet, a blog about writing and publishing in what she calls the digital near future. And Richard Flanagan, who's not just a writer, but one of our great writers, from Death of a River Guide to Wanting. Also a thinker, a passionate reader who has twice lit up our club before, and I'm thrilled to have him here tonight. Please welcome them all. Richard, I'd like to start with you. Explain, if you will, this theory that our connectedness with the net is actually impacting on our capacity to read and think deeply.
Well, there's a couple of sort of sides to that. I think the critical one is we are producing too much material, and that is affecting attention spans and to some extent quality. I think the critical thing, though, is to do with distraction. We're just constantly connected, so therefore we're constantly distracted. We have generally are always walking around with a mobile phone. It's always going off. We've got emails coming in. So it's actually quite difficult to concentrate. It depends on what kind of screen you're talking about. I mean, I think Kindles are one thing. They're relatively static and are fairly similar to books. But if you start talking about something like a computer or a phone or particularly an iPad, you know, they have email coming in. You can get distracted with hyperlinks.
What do you think? I mean, do you believe this, this neuroscience of the brain, of waves changing?
Well, I agree with Richard in that everything we do changes our brain. You know, that's just all of the sensory input that comes in that's going to have effect on our brain. I don't think I buy the science that somehow that means that we're becoming more shallow in terms of our thinking and our capacity because of the way that we are interacting with technology on a minute-to-minute basis. There's actually some good studies that show that distraction has a positive effect on our ability to solve problems creatively, that it actually has a good effect on groups in terms of their instance of innovation and new ideas. So I'm not sure that the balance of the ledger around distraction with all of this technology automatically comes down on the negative side.
The argument's terrifying. I mean, up till the late 60s, it was thought that the brain was static, and then that you know, it was a fixed thing. And the way to research into it now is that it is amazingly plastic, and it constantly changes depending on the inputs. And the argument is that because of our incessant use of the web and its endlessly distracting nature, the mind changes, so it does become very good at rapid multiple tasking. It does become very good at a certain shallow thinking that's still a good thinking for solving numerous tasks and for living in the modern world, but that it destroys our capacity for deep meditative thought. And if the argument is correct, what it means, it's not about whether there will be books in the future, it is whether any of us will be capable of reading a book as we once had. So it is an argument of complete despair. And I think there is a large weight of scientific evidence that our minds do constantly change and that our use of the web is changing them. But I don't believe it will destroy books or reading because books have shown themselves to be a remarkably adaptable medium with technological change. and they are in themselves a great invention of the human spirit, perhaps one of the greatest inventions. And I think they will, they'll get through this.
Is there, do you reckon, an actual difference between text on paper and text on screen?
Again, the scientific evidence is people do read screens differently. They skim them. They actually read them in an E or an H shape. They don't sort of read it as you read a book. But people are reading more and more literature on electronic devices. I checked up yesterday, and as best I could find out, e-book sales in Australia last year were about 3% of total sales. This year they're 10%. And the question is, will they completely cannibalise paper book sales, or will they be one more platform? And no one knows the answer to that. And I think it'll come down to price, because price is always the big thing with these. And if paper books end up the same price as e-books, then there'll be a place for them. And if they don't, there won't be. Yeah. That's really it. And the positive thing, there's a lot I don't like about the web. I don't have an e-reader or an iPad or anything like that. But the history of books shows again and again, whenever there's a revolution where people make books more cheaply, you get an explosion of literacy, and you get an extraordinary outburst of great writing. From the time Aldous in the early 16th century started printing on paper instead of vellum and brought out his little pocketbook copies, onwards to the paperback revolution and so on. Every time people are able to produce books more cheaply, suddenly you get an explosion of interest in books and writing.
But it does seem to me, and just from my own personal experience, it does seem that there is a bit of a difference with me between screens and paper. I mean, screens, I've got a sort of email mindset. I'm sort of fast, set, retrieve. I want a bit of information. I want to go and do something else. And I'm quite often I'm sitting down quite often. I'm at a desk quite often. With paper, it's quite often not at work. I might be lying down rather than sitting down. I have a slower mindset. I'm more relaxed. I'm more reflective. It's almost as though paper's more absorbent. The other thing that I seem to get is with screens, because I'm doing things quickly, I make mistakes and I don't see broad context and implications. Whereas on paper, my thinking is a little bit bigger. I'm engaging my imagination a little bit more. So if that's true, then maybe screens work brilliantly for the acquisition of facts. I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with all textbooks being e-books in the future, but I would have a problem if all novels became e-books. If it was, if I had to read it on a screen, I would object to that.
You also work with the Future of the Book Institute, and there they talk about the way books will change, that books will not be written just by one person anymore. Books will be written by multiple people.
I don't think this is a terrible time. I think this is an exciting and creative time. And it's an exciting and creative time for writers and storytellers, and it's an exciting time for readers. For readers particularly, because they suddenly have much more choice and control over how they design their experience of reading and how they come to literature and knowledge and ideas. And I think that's a wonderful thing, to not have to constrain people to only coming at text and ideas and literature in one way is going to lead to all kinds of creative collaborations. The ability to bring content to life in different forms is within the hands of so many more individuals than it used to be.
Do you want multiple individuals writing a book?
Well, you're going to have... There is going to be a certain hell, isn't there, of self-publication. And there's just going to be a mass of things out there that very few people are ever going to look at. And it's going to lead... Everyone is going to wish not to be a reader but to be a writer. And they're going to be prey to the worst parasites, of which, American creative writing schools are just the beginning. And so I don't know if it's an entire blessing. Of course, there'll be some great things come out of it. And of course, there will be moments of genius that will arise through it. Of course, there's going to be socially collaborative forms that will evolve on the net. But personally, I like novels, and that's my interest. And for all that this talk of choice, what you're seeing at the moment is the collapse of a way of not just an industry, but of a certain culture of books that is that's deeply sad. And there are writers who won't write books anymore, who should, because they don't have a market. And writing and literature arose when writers could make a living out of it. And it's not going to be easy for most people on the net to do that. You know, it's going to end up exactly, in the end, it'll go back to what we've got now, in that the corporations will come back in and there will be a commercial relationship with all the evil of that and some of the positives of that. And this idea that it is a utopia for all, where everyone publishes and everyone read, I think that's something of an illusion.
I mean, I sort of agree with everybody in the sense that, I mean, I don't have a problem with collaborative novels that are interactive. You can write yourself in, you can have audio links, and they can even smell, for all I care, as long as I can still buy the version I want.
That's the question.
That's the absolutely critical thing. And I don't, you know, I personally want to know what's in your mind. I don't want to read something that's the work of 300 people, although occasionally I will. But I mean, it was interesting when I was writing the book. I was sort of writing it in various ways, and I remember chatting to an Australian teacher in particular who'd given up getting her students to write on screens because she was finding they were just sort of cutting and pasting and all the rest of it, and tried to get them to go back to writing by hand on paper. And her point, I thought, was very interesting, was if you're writing something by hand, there's quite a high cost to making a mistake because you've got to start again or rub it out or something. So you actually had to think before you wrote. And I think one of the problems, particularly with social media, is people are just sort of publishing before they're even thinking. I mean, they're just sort of, and it's just being churned out. And I think, actually, you know, the use of a pencil on a piece of paper does really engage the mind at quite a deep level, and you really have to think very, very carefully about what it is you want to say. And I mean, if you want to talk about the future of the book, to some extent, we're all far too old to answer the question. Go and talk to a bunch of 10-year-olds, and actually, personally, I'm quite scared about what they might be saying. I mean, I had a conversation with somebody who's about sort of 13, 14 recently, who openly admitted that they don't read books anymore because they're too long, which is back to this attention span point. They're not sort of interactive enough for them. And, you know, if we ask
and
everyone...
no one needs to listen to their opinion.
If we ask everybody what they want, and we just go and sort of find what most people want, we will throw out Shakespeare. It's too damn hard. You know, already you can buy executive summary versions of nursery rhymes for really time-pressed parents and multitasking toddlers. That's the sort of thing, and I don't have a problem with that, as long as the other stuff is still around. And also, I think, you know, kids should be forced to read certain things, and yeah, they're hard. Shut up and get over it. When I was writing the latest book, I actually at one point decided that I wanted to get a little bit of research about where people did their best thinking. And by best, I meant deepest, reflective, original, imaginative. So nothing to do with decision-making at all, really. And I emailed a load of people and got absolutely no response. I sent some typed letters to... These are people I don't know, completely cold. I typed some letters up and sent them through and got a reasonable response. And then I just thought, I had a sort of mad thought and thought, what if I actually hand-wrote some letters? And the first thing, my hand nearly fell off because I wasn't used to writing that much. The muscles had almost sort of withered away. And I got the most extraordinary response. And I think how material is presented does create a certain reaction. Now, whether there's a difference between reading 1984 on a screen and reading it on paper, I couldn't tell you at the moment. I'm not sure. And there's probably a personal element in it as well. But I really do think that we receive messages in subtly different ways, and perhaps not so subtly different ways, according to how they are produced.
And there was a similar outcry when Gutenberg's press came around as well. And, you know, we had a whole lot of monks running around saying, well, it's not a real book unless it's been hand-scribed by monks, you know. So, you know, the book, people forget the book is technology. The book itself, the printed artefact, is technology.
And reading changes, that's the other thing. I mean, you didn't have... initially, writing didn't even encompass stories. That was thought to be... denigrating stories to actually write them up. That happens about 2,000 years, about 3,000 years ago. You don't have spaces between words till about 1,200 years ago. You don't have modern punctuation till 500 years ago. And each of these points allow people to write, to communicate much more complex thoughts, much more meaningful thoughts to readers. And so writing will continue to evolve and reading will evolve. It will get It's never a static thing.
On electronic devices?
Well, obviously the electronic devices are going to alter them. I like a particular form, which is the novel. These socially collaborative things, I don't knock them. I just don't see them as the novel, but they will become something else. I mean,
I knock them. I mean, the Future of the Book Institute has been running this exploration where they've taken the Golden Notebook, the famous Doris Lessing book, landmark feminist tract, and I think 13 women have added there. Well, I just want to be really confident that in 50 years' time you can still buy the Doris Lessing version, not the amended by 13 other people version.
Isn't the point, reading and writing are intensely individual and private acts, and the web is a public act and it's a social act. That is a huge difference. When we read a book and we love it, we lend it the complete authority of our souls, you know, and we grant it that authority of all our history, and that's when a book becomes alive to us. But if you end up with e-books in the way, you know, people are talking about, where you click on a quote and up comes, you know, a social website with 20 other people who've clicked on that quote, that destroys that individual and private moment. And
Or does it for you?
Well,
it turns it into something else, you know.
Well, again, I think that does turn it into something else. Well, firstly, I'd probably dispute that reading is an intensely private act and always has been, because I think books have always been social. You know, books are wonderful social glue. They are things that enable us to have conversations with each other and to connect with each other's sense of the world. And what digital media has done is enabled those conversations to come into the realm of the reading of the book. Now, yes, that changes the experience of reading it, but I would go back to that notion that that is within the reader's control. If you don't want to have the voice of other readers in your head when you're reading a text, then don't engage
But
with
I don't
it.
want to be
reading.
reading. I don't want to be reading the Golden Notebook and have Barry from Albury
Then don't read it
Wodonga
that way.
coming over my shoulder. Just you know, that's.
You say that you control, but are we really going to choose?
Yeah, I think we are. I really do. I think that the fundamental shift that is taking place now is a shift of power towards the reader. And that is really what's going on. It's a shift away from the people who produce books and literature and a shift towards the people who read and consume and share them. And the exercise of those choices are the exciting experiments that we're starting to see.
And if those books turn into graphic versions or pictorial versions, or that's great.
Welcome.
No.
Why not?
Oh, I don't mind that. I'm not sure where this. I mean, I like the noble rhetoric of power to the reader, but didn't the reader always decide? I mean, books were always made by readers. They weren't made by critics or literary establishments or literary fashion. These things came and went and almost invariably got it wrong. Books and writers throughout the ages were made and sustained by readers. And it was always thus.
Kate was talking before about the democratisation that's possible. How do you read that? I mean, you have to deal with publishers.
Yeah, well, I think these things Kate are talking about are terrific, you know, because that always is to the benefit of literature to readers. And really there's going to be a great battle go on between those like Kate who wish to democratise the web, who want to see a lot of small producers, publishers, whatever you want to call them, and these super global corporations like Amazon and Apple, who are truly terrifying in the amount of control they want to have. And the outcome of that war is not clear, and no one should take it for granted what the consequences of it will be.
I would like to read just from the Future, the Institute for the Future of the Book. This is just someone who wrote in last month, and I think gives an idea of how the problem that does face print ahead, because this is a guy, right, he says, you know, he reads almost exclusively on screen, he's got a Kindle, an iPad, an iPhone, a BlackBerry, a laptop, but this weekend I did something radical and old school. I checked out a big thick book out of the library. This is the bit I love. The physicality of the book, having to hold it open, then lift and turn each page was a lot more exhausting than I remembered. But all of that holding and lifting and turning distracted me from the book. What's happening to modern people?
All that atrophied limbs and muscles from having to...
All that holding and lifting and turning. This is the problem, clearly. They've been weakened.
I mean, it could be that ebooks create a sort of greater appreciation for, inverted commas, the real thing. I mean, you know, photography didn't kill painting. I mean, and let's not forget that a lot of books that are published are junk and shouldn't really be printed in the first place, in my view. And maybe if they all drifted off to ebooks and the quality
that's
end
just
was...
snobbery. That is outrageous.
No, there's a real problem at the moment in the sense they are too cheap to produce, and there's a lot of good essays being turned into mediocre books that shouldn't really exist, in my view, as a book. And there's a lot of clutter out there that could be sort of swept aside a little bit. So I don't know, but I mean, there are some issues around there's just too much information out there.
Kate, Richard before was saying, rough, as an estimate, somewhere between a third and 2/3 will migrate across to ebooks. Do you have any sense?
No, I've long given up trying to predict numbers and things like that because the pace of change and the scope of change has shocked even me over the last 18 months in particular. But let's say I think at least half, and I think a lot faster than people realise.
And you really believe that they will travel in parallel, that print and electronic will travel together?
Yeah, but again, I think the economics are going to shift around these industries. So how they are published, who they're published by, and how we go about actually purchasing them, where we find print books. All of those things are going to be subject to change because the underpinning supply chains that are currently supporting modern publishing are being disrupted by these changes.
What happens to the bookshop?
Oh, well, I think it's a very hard time for booksellers, but the evidence around the world is that it's the people in the middle getting squeezed, the suburban chains. A lot of people think independent bookstores may return stronger, and because there is going to be this increased interest in books because they do offer a specialist service, and I actually think we're living in a strange age. Separate of the technology, but it is to culture and literature a bit what the 60s was to food, and everyone was just enchanted by sliced white bread and making soup out of frozen asparagus spears and things like that. And then at a certain point, people came to their senses and wanted food again. And I think there's just so much going on, and everyone's bewitched and bewildered and smitten with it. But at the end, people are going to want to read books again. And whether it's electronic version or a paper version.
I mean, that to me cuts to the critical thing is in that a lot of the discussion has been around formats, essentially, and distribution channels and the rest of it. And to some extent, to me, it's not so much is it the death of the book, is it the death of reading, which is obviously closely linked. And there is an argument that says we're sort of moving to this sort of post-literate age where, we can read, but we just choose not to.
I worry that, in fact, the economics of the market will be such that they will simply decide in the way that at the moment Amazon, when they decide if they don't like the subject, they took, I think last year, books on incest off people's Kindles. A few years ago, they took of all books, they took 1984 off people's Kindles because of copyright reasons. They can remove a book if they want to.
Yeah, and this is the interesting thing with paper books because you can't censor a paper book. Once that person's got the paper book, you've got an electronic book. They can sort of mess with that. They can delete it. And there is a problem. There's this huge concentration in a couple of global superstores. And what happens if China buys Amazon, I mean, it's quite terrifying in that regard. And it also means that regional cultures like ours, I was talking to Kate about this earlier. Kate's got a much more optimistic outlook on it. But this handful of global corporations want to have complete power over what's published, and in that, something like our culture doesn't loom very important because it doesn't make much money for them, and that's a problem.
So if you're a reader and not a specialist, and you're sitting at home and you're thinking, well, the way it's going to unfold will be, accepting there is absolutely no certainty, your call would be, Richard Watson?
I agree, actually. I think ebooks are going to move very quickly. They're going to be bigger than most people think. They won't kill the physical book. That will still exist. And I think it'll be pretty good. I mean, we'll get rid of the junk bookshops, the ones that were no good in the first place. We'll keep the really good local ones. We'll keep the really good libraries. So in a funny kind of way, in a complete turnaround, it's relatively optimistic, I think, in a way, as long as we're not forced down one particular route against our will.
Kate?
I'm optimistic in the best sense. I think that we are going to see an abundance of titles available. We're going to see a multitude of channels to get those titles, and we're going to see conversations taking place between readers that didn't take place before. So I'm excited, and I think this is going to be a really fun time.
Short term, I think it's very sad because there are people losing jobs. There are writers, really good writers, who can't write anymore because the market's collapsed for them. There are people losing jobs in publishing houses, very good people. So I think that's that's an awful thing, particularly when those people have been so important to what matters in books, and there will be a loss of choice in short term for readers in consequence. Longer term, I think I'm optimistic, and I think, as I said, because history shows again and again when books become cheaper, always with a new format, you do get a revolution in the books that are written, and you get the most marvellous flowering. And I think that's what will happen. And when it happens, I don't know, but possibly sooner rather than later.
And do you think that writers will share in this? I mean, because we're talking about readers.
Well, I think one of the big struggles is how do writers make a living out of this, and how does everybody make a living out of it? Because people can't... The rise of great literature was bound up in the rise of people who could afford to sit at a table day in, day out, and slowly, with that very slow crafting of the books we all love. And it's not clear how those writers are going to be supported at the moment, but I imagine inevitably, that this will be sorted.
Thank you so much, and a big thanks to our guests. Thank you, Richard Watson, Kate Eltham and Richard Flanagan. Thank you. Lots to chew on. And until we meet again on the first Tuesday of next month, very happy reading. Enjoy it while you can. Good night. Did you enjoy that? It's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah.